We've got Paul Bassat, Seek, SquarePeg, too many things to count. Giving his time up to talk with us tonight. Let's do it for real. Come on. One more bit of housekeeping. So Slido, don't have to download anything. Please ask questions here. You don't go to the audience. We just you guys get to thumbs up and thumbs down which questions we're going to take at the end. Bit of technology.
They thumbs up and thumbs down the answers as well, or just the questions?
Yeah, well, we'll see you at the end. If you want to start spoiling you, man, I'll walk you out. Don't worry, it's okay.
Good.
Thanks for coming, Paul.
Good to be here. Actually, last time, so it was 3 years ago, last time, which I think was down in Inspire 9.
Yeah, 99 Designs.
Was it 99 Designs?
Yeah, we were floor above.
Okay.
Level above.
And first they got locked in the bathroom before the session, so that was problematic.
Yeah.
And then about 15 minutes in, someone at the back said, "We can't hear you." So at the back, can you hear me tonight? Yeah. So we're going much better tonight. It's a much better start.
3 years, mate. We've come a long way. You know, we've got the mics right. Everything's going.
It's all working.
Let's go back. A lot of people weren't there. You know, the community keeps changing. A lot of people entering the market. I want to go back to. I'll tell you how far back. Usually I go. Was there a mother or father that was an entrepreneur?
No, my mum was a lawyer. Mum was a lawyer. Dad actually worked in technologies. He was an engineer by trade. Both were migrants. Came to Australia in my mum's case in the late 1940s. Holocaust survivor. Dad came to Australia in mid-1950s, and he was an engineer and spent 25 years working at IBM. And now has his own IT. He still turned 80 a couple of months ago and still very involved in IT and runs his own IT business, which is pretty cool.
Is it Dad, please get out of the office kind of thing? Or?
No, actually we never, in the whole time at Seek, it's funny, I think it was in our like a seed round, Dad wanted to invest and Andrew and I were like, no, it's like, this is already enough pressure, sorry, we can't deal with even more pressure, so we wouldn't let him invest. And so I think it was like only around the B round or the C round that we let him invest, so he sort of has reminded us that a few times. No, he never, in fact, I think in the whole time I was at Seek, I can't speak for Andrew, and the whole time I was at Seek, we probably really only had, I remember one conversation we had about work, and it was really good advice that I actually took. It was around, we were looking for a new CIO, but that was literally in my 14 years at Seek, I think the only time he, and it was more, I think I asked him the question, but no, we never really talked a lot about work and stuff.
You got, I don't know if you know the guys at Envato, but Collis's dad, he's just wandering around.
Yeah, no, it's different. I know them really well, and they're great people, and it's different there. Obviously, Fuad's is chairman, I think,
yeah.
And that's an amazing company. It's a great Aussie, great Melbourne success story. They've built an amazing business, and they're fantastic people.
That's another month. Yeah. So tell me, go back. I love. Last time we spoke about Seek, I'd love for you to go through the journey, and particularly the kind of hardships as it relates to the audience. And I remember the story about you saying nobody really gave a shit about the online bit, and you faxed all these jobs on a Friday night, and you had this. I just love those kind of startup problems that even Seek faced.
Yeah, bearing in mind, this was 1997 we started, or the site launched in March 98, and we started the business in what I'd call a really linear way, and not the way I think you'd want to start a business today. It was kind of, an idea, followed by a business plan, followed by getting some money, followed by building the site, hiring a sales team. It was kind of a really linear process. It wasn't a particularly organic process, and a lot's changed the last 20 years, and it's a lot of ways it's a lot easier to start a business today, but it's a level playing field at the end of the day. When I say easier, it's easier in an absolute sense, but it's not easier in a relative sense because it's easier for everyone. And so we sort of, we got started, when we first sort of started seeing, and Matt Rockman, so it was Matt, Andrew and I were sort of the three founders, and Matt was in charge of sales, and all of us were sort of doing sales in the early years, but when you'd go out and see it was mainly recruitment firms we were going to see in the early days. They were the guys who could provide the big volume. and you'd go out and you'd see a recruitment firm, and basically the first two questions were, one is, who's Seek, and the second one is what's the internet. So it's very, very early. If you think about 1997, I mean, the level of penetration was still relatively low. I mean, through 97, 98, 99, it just kind of completely took off. But one of the things that we realised early on was, you've just got to remove any impediments in the way to kind of getting volume and building the business, and that's particularly true of marketplace businesses. Marketplace businesses are different to other sorts of businesses, and in certain ways, in most ways, they're very similar. If folks wanted to fax us ads, we would type them on. I mean, we really want to make it as easy as possible. We're also very, very clear in the sell, which was, we'd gone into people and said, chuck out your newspapers and stop advertising a newspaper. And even though you've done that for the last 20 or 30 years, there's a new, better way of doing it, and start using Seek. Like, we wouldn't have got anywhere. So it was much more of a supplemental sale. And so you'd be going to, be identifying early adopters in markets, and you'd be going, people who kind of embrace technology, and the sell would be, look, the incremental cost is really, really low, and you're trying to differentiate yourself from your competitors to your clients. And one of the ways of you differentiating yourself is by saying, as well as doing all the things that other recruitment firms are doing to source candidates, I'm also doing this new thing called the internet, where I'm kind of able to access all these young tech-savvy candidates, et cetera. And so, stage one was kind of getting the early adopters on board. And then once you got the early adopters on board, you'd knock on the competitor's door and you'd say, hey, by the way, do you know your competitor's advertising on Seek? You don't want to be left behind. And that was a process with the recruitment firms. Probably within about 3 or 4 years, we had basically every recruitment firm in Australia advertising. It took a lot longer to get the corporates, and a lot longer again to get small business, and a lot longer again to get government. But it was just a process.
Can I take it even one step back? Sorry, and where did the want to create this product or the problem? How did it start?
The story sort of started. Actually, started as it turned out. It was a year to the day. I mean, again, sort of just talking about linear process. Sort of the whole genesis of it sort of started a year to the day before we launched the site. So 16th of March 1997, and my wife was pregnant with our second child. We were looking to buy a new house. So it sort of started looking for a house, and the frustration of looking for a house. And I was standing at an auction one day. I just an aside, I mean, how I'd learnt a little bit about the internet. I was a lawyer, didn't know a lot about technology, still don't. And a friend of mine was a guy called Evan Thornley, who some people in the room might know, and Evan and I went to uni together, and he came back to Australia from the States and set up LookSmart, which was one of the early search engines, and he needed a lawyer. So that's how I learned about the internet in 95, 96, and the Netscape IPO and the Yahoo IPO. Like, it was a really, really, really exciting time. And I was at an auction one day, and we'd seen this house on the day of the auction, and Sharon, as you do probably when this is March, Jasmine was born in June, so Sharon was 6 months pregnant. As you do when you're sort of 6 months pregnant, she was a bit antsy and wanted us to bid on this place and stuff, and we literally only discovered it that morning. And then just the idea of doing a real estate classified site came into my head. Anyway, I chatted to Andrew about it, I think a few days later, and we kicked it around, and that idea morphed into employment rather than real estate for a bunch of reasons, although we called it Seek because the intention was to be broad across various categories, not just jobs. I mean, in the end, we took the view that it made sense to go deep rather than broad. Again, it was a learning around marketplace businesses. And we sort of got going, but again, we spent 6 months doing a business plan. So we're working, Andrew in particular was a management consultant who was working incredibly hard. I was working long hours. So we sort of did a business plan on nights and weekends. I mean, it's just a very different way of starting a business, perhaps the way you do it today.
You mentioned that you kind of were thinking about the scope of possibly going into real estate stuff. As an entrepreneur, and I'm sure that a lot of people in the audience can kind of resonate with this, kind of filled with all these crazy ideas, right? Especially, and sometimes myself, maybe it's because I'm highly caffeinated most of the day, find it hard to just, kind of focus on one thing. How do you stop yourself when there's, $1 million or multi-million-dollar offers trying to drag you in a way and still keep it on point?
You mean once we started the business or before?
Once you started, sorry.
Oh, look, I think again, the one thing that we understood is that, I sort of say that we got a couple of things, we got a few things really right and a lot of things wrong. And the two things we got right were probably the two most important things. And one was around people and just bringing in just really, really outstanding people into the business and just having a culture where people felt a great sense of ownership, where, and we had really great retention of people and people really scaled and grew with the business. And I think it was, and I think, I've been out of the business 6 years, but I'm sure, and, obviously my brother still runs it and still got a bunch of great friends there. I think it's still a very special place to work. But the other thing was just understanding that in marketplace businesses, they're either typically winner take all or winner take most. So, if I sort of said to you, sort of general classifieds, you're looking to buy general classified items or whatever, what website would you go to? You'd go to eBay. Unless you're in Japan, you go to Yahoo, in New Zealand, you go to TradeMe. But in specific geographies, that is an absolute winner-take-all market. In real estate, they've been winner-take-most. So you've got here realestate.com.au. You've got Domain, which is a pretty good number 2 player. In the US, you've got Zillow and Trulia, same ownership now. But you had, a pretty clear number 1, and then a strong number 2, then a distant number 3. And so these are winner-take-all or winner-take-most markets. And so when you kind of understand there's going to be one winner and, close to 100% of the economics is going to accrue to that winner, then it really, really does focus the mind.
Right. And is your brother kind of a straightforward guy too, keeping you in check, or is it the other way around?
It's a good question. I mean, I was definitely the adult supervision. If anyone who knows Andrew and Matt, Matt's the same age as me, he's a couple of weeks younger, and Andrew's a couple of years older. I was definitely the adult supervision, and that's a relative concept. I mean, we had a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun. There was, it was definitely not serious the whole time. I mean, I remember once sort of escorting our landlord through the building, and meanwhile, Matt had pushed Andrew through a wall. And they weren't having a fight, they were just having a bit of fun and coffee cups kind of frying hard discs. And so it was a really, really fun environment there. I think it was a really nice balance of skills and personalities and temperaments between the three of us. But businesses, way too much focus is put on founders. And, the importance of founders is often, I think people outside, and it's the same in, large companies, people tend to focus on the CEO, etc. The role itself obviously is really, really important, but it's the importance of such a broad group of people who kind of sort of contribute to the success of business, and particularly in terms of the culture. I'm a big believer that strategy is very much a top-down thing, but culture very much should be a bottom-up thing. And a lot of the best things that happened at Seek weren't driven by any of us. So we're driven by just individuals in the business saying, hey, we should do this, or, how about we do this, or we should stop doing that, or whatever, which is really fantastic.
How do you get that culture right? I mean, I always ask the question about scaling culture. You said that you were hiring the best people you can. What's the alternative to a bootstrap kind of startup to try and attract the right talent and get that culture right?
Well, I think the first thing is what are you hiring on? So we were very, very clear. We were hiring on fit and values much more than we were on skills. And again, different companies are kind of have different focus and different roles. Different roles require different things and stuff. But first and foremost, in a perfect world, every candidate that you'd hire would be 9 or 10 out of 10 on fit and culture, and 9 or 10 out of 10 on skills and experience and capability. But obviously the world's not perfect. So to the extent we had to compromise, we would compromise first on experience, and then probably even a little bit on horsepower rather than compromising on culture and stuff. But I think also you have to be really honest and transparent around what your culture is. I mean, the thing about culture is we put sort of pejorative terms. It's a good culture, it's a bad culture. The truth is, even the best company in the world has kind of, kind of some weird things or some bad things about their culture, and even the worst business has some good things. These are subjective things, but kind of really understanding what was important to your organisation and kind of trying to really embed that. We embedded that through the recruiting, but we also embedded that through performance management in a very tangible way, through promotions, through bonus, through option grants, all those sorts of things. But that was a specific decision we made, which was to really, bearing in mind, I've left the business 6 years ago. The business is now 20 years old. I was there first 14 years. So it's a very, very different business today. I can only talk to my 14 years there. But that was something that was really, really important to us.
So moving forward and just going along the journey of Seek, and I won't harp on it too long, so much to cover, but when did you kind of just know that it was going to be successful, and how do you scale at the rate you need to do, and without trying to sinking?
Yeah. Well, look, we had our program. We were really lucky at Seek. I look at some of our startups and some of the really, really tough experiences that the companies in our portfolio have gone through and go through every day. And we had a bunch of those things, but I actually think our experience on the whole was a lot. We weren't a business that kind of got within, I know one company, Evan's company, Look Smart, he'll say this publicly. I think sort of 7 or 8 times they got within days of not being able to meet payroll. And I think, he personally guaranteed, PAYG obligations to the government and all, to the tax office and stuff like that. So we never had, our experience was never that tough. It feels really hard and it's a real grind. One of the things that, I sort of laugh at, but occasionally people sort of say, oh, we've just had a record month in our business. And I'm like, yeah, isn't that supposed to happen every month? And that, the truth is, in a startup, it should happen every month. And we went, with the exception of December, which was a seasonally slow month, we went 2008, 1998, we went literally 110, 120 months in a row of record revenue. Literally every month was higher than the subsequent months. So we kind of thought that was normal. It's only now you realise, how lucky we were. But specifically, come back to your question, it was probably, again, marketplace businesses are really, really hard because, the job seekers want to go to the site with where all the jobs are, and the folks advertising, the employers, the recruitment firms want to advertise where all the job seekers are. The problem is on day one, you've got no jobs, no job seekers. So that's a challenge you've got to overcome, and that's really hard. I would say it was probably about 15, 16. It was probably around about mid 2000 and 1999 when you could just sense, the anecdotal feedback from the clients got better. The churn went down significantly. The feedback from job seekers, imperfect as it was, because you wouldn't find out when you only had indirect ways of finding out when people got a job through Seek. There wasn't obviously a direct feedback loop, but kind of the feedback got a lot better. The churn went down. It kind of was just starting to work. Those kind of marketplace dynamics where more jobs attract more job seekers and more job seekers attract more jobs, they were starting to kick in, and that was a really exciting time because suddenly you knew, even though we were probably losing close to $1 million, we had certain months we were losing about $1 million, but you kind of knew it was going to work. And one of the things we were focused on in terms of financial metrics, we were much more focused on market share metrics than we were financial metrics. But every month, even though the loss might have been going up as we sort of got more aggressive and built out the sales team and spent a ton on marketing and product, as a percentage of revenue, our loss kept going down every month. And that again was something that was important to us, but the main focus was around, it's firstly around building your volumes, then around driving the revenue, then around profitability, kind of thinking about it in that order. And that was probably over about a 6 or 7 year period.
And is it at that point where you start looking offshore and looking at opportunities?
No, we didn't start looking offshore. We didn't make a single acquisition. Well, we made a couple of tiny acquisitions, and Andrew very much drove that stuff and all the offshore stuff, which has been obviously a huge driver of growth for the business. But we didn't start thinking about that stuff. We were so focused, again, you'd much prefer win one market than come second in 10 markets, basically. And we were so focused on the Australian New Zealand market, and then We didn't start to think about offshore until about, after we were listed, it was about 2006. And then in the space of about 3 years or so, we invested in businesses in Brazil, in Mexico, in China, in a first business in Southeast Asia, then a second business in Southeast Asia, and then after I left those two businesses, Seek took control of both of those and brought them together. Again, the expansion into education didn't happen until about 2006 from memory. So, this is, if you think about it, this is 9 years in. We were really, really focused on organic growth. And then the non-organic growth happened pretty aggressively, but it happened after a pretty long period. And it was, it's been by any measure that non-organic growth was very, very successful. As I said, most of the credit goes to Andrew and a bunch of other people who worked on it. And, but we were a fair way into the journey before we started.
Don't worry, you're allowed to take some of the credit here. Andrew's not here today. Is this, some advice that you give to some of your portfolio companies about trying to, I think a lot of startups get it in their mind that I'm going to get a little bit of success here and then I'm chasing that Silicon Valley dream? Yeah,
look, it depends what you mean. I think number one, when so there's a geographic lens to this. And so for the most part, the bulk of business that we're focused on are focusing on solving problems on a global basis, or in some cases doing it on a local basis through Southeast Asia. A lot of the companies we've invested in Southeast Asia are typically focused on the region. But, generally speaking, pretty much most of the portfolio companies we invested in aren't just focused on local opportunities. Some of them are. So Prosper, which is a fantastic financial services lender, small business lender, is just a local business. But most of our other, Australian founded companies like Rock, like UpGuard, etc., are focused globally. But, the core point about focus is really, really important. I think by and large, again, without wanting to generalise, most entrepreneurs, typically their want and their default is to try to do too much. And, focus is really, really important. And again, there's a pathological optimism that comes with being an entrepreneur, and it's part of it. It goes with the territory, and it's really, really important. But sometimes you just have to be realistic about what you can do, and and it's finding the balance between you want to push the boundaries, you want to challenge yourself, you want to stretch yourself. But at the same time, you've got to be realistic about what you can do, and it'd be better to do 3 things really well than 10 things badly. That's obvious. And sometimes some of the entrepreneurs in our portfolio need reminding of that, but others sometimes need to be pushed. We're all individuals. We're all a bit different.
So moving forward, so Andrew takes control of the company, right? And then where did you think you kind of had done all you had wanted to do, or you just wanted to take a break and try something new with VC? How did the transition happen there, or was it the need that you saw for venture capital in Australia? Go through that transition.
Yeah, I think for me, sort of career journeys is a very, very personal thing. And for me, I probably got to the point, and this is, you don't wake up one. In fact, I do remember one specific conversation. It wasn't, but don't want to put too much weight on the conversation. But I remember I was at a dinner one night, and I was sitting next to someone, and I introduced ourselves, and he asked me what I did, and told him, and he said, "Oh wow, you must be just bouncing out of bed every day to go to work and stuff like that. That sounds really exciting." And the truth is, the business at that point was probably just about its most exciting period. We'd gone through the GFC, which was a real grind and really hard. And kind of we were, the business was kind of, sort of 2009, 2010 was starting to grow strongly again. We saw the international businesses, make some really, really good progress. The share price was sort of zooming. All those sort of things were really, really good. But the truth is that, if I thought about my mindset, or when I did think about it, I continue to be incredibly passionate about the business. I loved the company. I loved the people there. It was like a family. But I probably wasn't as passionate about the job anymore. And it just felt like the right time for me to make a change. And I separated, for me, I wanted to sort of separate 2 things. One was, do I want to stay at Seek? Am I continuing to be as energised and passionate as I have been the last 13 or 14 years? Or is that starting to wane a bit? That was sort of question 1. And question 2 was, what am I going to do next? And for me, it was really, really important to separate those two things. And and obviously not everyone has that luxury. I was really, really lucky that I could just kind of finish up and leave without certainty around what I'd do next. But for me, that was extremely important because I wanted to separate those two things because I think it's really easy to conflate the two issues, and then you end up kind of, well, I'm going to stay until I think about something to do. I'm going to stay at Seek until I can think of something else to do, which I think is the wrong way to think about it. It was like, no, it's time. It's been amazing. Time to take a break. Took 6 months off with the family, travelled, and then came back. And fairly soon after, we started SquarePeg.
So was there always an interest in giving back? I mean, I find it as like quite a common theme to successful entrepreneurs, particularly in the Valley, but even just as much in Australia, about that mentality of giving it back.
Yeah, I mean, look, absolutely. I mean, I think there's a couple of part answer to that question. First part is absolutely, but I was part of a company. We were incredibly lucky. We had unbelievable support from a lot of different people along the journey. I'm not just about financial support, but in a lot of different ways. A lot of people supported us, and so I think it's really important in whatever way that is kind of something that you're passionate about and interested about to kind of make a contribution and give something back. But there's also so that's kind of one lens, but there's also a really, really, hard-headed's the wrong term, but it's the best term I can think about. There's a real hard-headed lens to what we can do. So we are genuinely, and I've got Ben here is one of my colleagues in Melbourne, and Yulia has just joined our Boston office. So we've gone through 100% growth in Boston from 1 person to 2 people, and she joined us last week. Joined us a few weeks ago. Is in Australia this week. So at the back, Ben and Yulia, and so there's a really. We really, really want to contribute to the tech ecosystem in Australia. One of the separate things I do separate to SquarePeg is on the board of Innovation and Science Australia, and we're sort of charged with coming up with a strategy for making Australia a more innovative economy by 2030. So it's something I'm genuinely passionate about. But the only way that we can help support the tech ecosystem in Australia is backing businesses that are going to be successful. Now, that doesn't mean that every business we're going to back is going to be successful. We're going to make in venture, you make a lot more mistakes, you get a lot more wrong than you get right. But the point is that we're only going to back companies where we think the founders are genuinely world class, have the energy, the drive, the passion, the integrity. We're not going to back people because we think they're nice people and we want to support the ecosystem. Because the only way, it's a little bit like giving money to a not-for-profit. If you give money to a not-for-profit and they do nothing with it and they don't contribute to the community, then you haven't helped anything. You've made yourself feel a bit better. So you want to support not-for-profits who are actually doing amazing things and are leveraging that financial contribution and contributing to the community in myriad ways. And it's the same with early stage businesses. Only a certain number can become Atlassians or can become car sales or campaign monitors or Envatos. And we want to back the entrepreneurs that we think have the really, really highest potential. We make no apologies for that.
So you brought me to a question I often ask when we've got a venture capitalist on stage is what does tick the box for Paul Bassat and SquarePeg in terms of the entrepreneur, the company? What are you looking for? You mentioned the founders.
Yeah, it's about people. It is about people first and foremost. And if I look at our portfolio and we look at the companies that are performing really, really well in our portfolio, it's usually because the people are doing an amazing job, and the companies that are performing less well, it's because the team's struggling in one form or another. The temptation in venture is to focus a bit too much on the business model and not enough on the people. And it's really hard on the people because you're not making judgments. Let's just say, for example, you spend time with a company, and we try really hard to spend a bunch of time with a company and get to know them pretty well before they're doing a funding round. So in a perfect world, we might have known a company for 6 or 12 or 18 months or 2 years before we invest in them. Doesn't always happen, but it's obviously much better than kind of getting to know them over a 4 or 5 week period. And so the first thing is sort of really, really getting to know those folks, getting to understand the company. And so let's say someone walks in your door and they're doing, they've started from scratch, they've got, 100 people in the business, they're doing $200,000 or $300,000 a month in revenue, they're growing 100% year on year. Question is, are they smart people? Pretty obvious. Anyone who can do that is really talented and really smart. The number of companies get from startup to kind of that sort of scale are really, really impressive people. And so that's not the question we've got to ask ourselves, whether they're smart, talented, passionate, energised, because they've answered that by getting to that stage. The question we're asking ourselves is, can they build a business with 1,000 people turning over $10 million a month? Having offices in 10 locations around the world, can they maintain that drive and energy for another 5 or 7 or 8 years? And so in simple terms, in language that all of us understand, is can they scale? Do they know what they don't know? Are they a great software engineer, or are they a great leader? Are they a great salesperson, or are they a great sales leader? And so they're the things that we spend a lot of time, sort of focusing on and making. I mean, it's in the end of the day, it's a subjective judgment, but that ultimately trumps the business, obviously, and the problem they're solving, and the uniqueness and the differentiators. All those things are really, really important. But the people piece is just so unbelievably important.
So is it safe to say that you kind of we want to see that a founder that can do that scale? Or is there sometimes when you come in and go, I know the perfect guy, but I need to get rid of this plan or this?
No, I mean, number one, it's about the team, not the founder or the founders. So, it depends. I mean, if it's really early stage, if it's a Series A company, most of the focus will be on the founders, because there probably won't be a lot there in terms of the team. But if it's a sort of a Series B or a Series C, it's going to be, wanting to spend a bit of time with all of the leadership team, not just the founders. But no, we would never invest in a company on the basis, we don't think the founder's any good, but we'll get rid of them and we'll put in someone new. We're backing the founders. The only exception to that, I mean, one of our really good examples, Property Gurus, a company we invested in Singapore, leading property portal in Southeast Asia, we invested in a couple of years ago. At the time of us investing, the founders said to us, look, over the next 12 to 18 months, we want to transit. We're still passionate about the business, we're engaged, we're motivated, but over the next 12 to 18 months, we want to transition away from being the two key leaders in the business and want to bring in a CEO. And that was just a great process. And when you've kind of got that transparency from the founders, but we would never invest in a company on the basis we don't think the founders can make it. You might discover midway through the process the founders are struggling and need a bunch of support, or maybe need to be replaced. But again, we've never, and again, I stand to be corrected. There isn't a single situation where we've replaced a founder. There's been some where the founder has sort of said, hey, I think it's time for me to transition away, and we've worked with them and supported them through the process. But we're backing the teams.
Can you go through the process of I kind of see that there's quite a bit of hustle in putting some of this fund together. The last fund was 230 million, if I'm not
Yeah, the current fund, 170 US, so yeah, give or take 230 in current exchange rate, yep.
So is it the hustle is still there for you to try and put this thing together, I guess?
Well, no, the fund's closed, so we don't have to raise.
Oh, sorry. When you were going through that process.
Oh yeah, that was hard work. Yeah, and it gives you great empathy. I mean, it gives you great empathy with our entrepreneurs. Which is really important, because the one thing, and it's something we talk about a lot in the team, is the one thing we can never lose sight of. I mean, a little bit like it's not a little bit like, but if you think about it as a doctor, like a doctor just, she goes to work every day and she sees a patient, and the first patient and the next patient, the next patient. But for the patient that doctor's seeing, that's the most important thing happening in the world, particularly if they're an oncologist or something. But it's, and so you can never lose sight of the fact as a venture capitalist that, it's easy for us to get a bit blasé or say, oh God, another company, and God, we've seen so many, and I'm just exhausted, and but for the people who are approaching us and looking for funding, this is probably the most important thing happening in the world right now. And of course, most companies that we meet, we can't fund, and we're not going to fund because, just the numbers for a start. We'll make 10 or 12 investments a year, and we'll see something like over 1,000 companies a year as a team. But something you can do to help them, to give them advice, to make a suggestion, give them some input. And sometimes that can be pretty brutal input. I mean, I think the one thing that we owe we owe founders, or we owe teams that we meet, is to be really honest with them. And our opinion obviously could be wrong. We always preface it like, we don't have perfect wisdom here, but our view is this. And so we've got to be really, really conscious of how important it is. How many people here are about to start a business or a founder of a company? Just show of hands. So it's probably about half or 2/3 of the people here. And, it is, and that's, we want to encourage as much of that as we possibly can. And in whatever small way we can help people, we try really, really hard to do it. We also got to be realistic. There's X number of hours in the week, and we're a pretty small team. So in a perfect world, we'd spend a couple of hours with every team that approaches us. It's not possible. Just the maths doesn't make it possible. But we want to do whatever we can to try to support entrepreneurs.
Given our last conversation was 3 years ago, and there probably wasn't that many events going on at the time. From an aerial view, what do you see has been happening, I guess Melbourne specifically, and the growth of the startup ecosystem here, and what are we doing well? What could we do better?
Yeah, look, I think the trajectory is really, really good. So, it's a little bit like, I'm a St Kilda supporter, so a long-suffering St Kilda fan. And any other St Kilda fans here? Yeah. Well done. And so you know what I'm talking about. But as a supporter of a footy team, in some respects, it's more important the trajectory you're going in than than the actual position. So you'd far prefer be the bottom of the ladder, but feel like you're moving in the right direction, than be the 10th best team, but feel like you're heading down this way. And I think it's a little bit like that with the ecosystem in Melbourne and Australia more generally. I mean, I think we're absolutely moving in the right direction. To be candid, I'm just back from Israel a few weeks ago, and if you sort of say that as a sort of a comparable ecosystem, because the Bay Area is just so big and so large, and so many of the biggest companies in the world are based there, so it's probably not a fair comparison. But if you use Israel sort of as the gold standard of non-Bay Area tech ecosystems, we're a long, long way behind. And when I say long way, we're talking a generation. We're not going to get there. If we think we're going to get there in the next 3 to 5 years, we're absolutely kidding ourselves. But it's important, and the reason why I know we're kidding ourselves is Israel's been doing it for 40 years. They didn't just sort of wake up one day and become, a great tech ecosystem. It's taken literally 40 years. Now, things probably happen more quickly today than they did 40 years ago, and the benefit for places like Melbourne and Australia more broadly is we can learn from the experiences of others. So we're moving in the right direction. I think, the level of energy and drive and vibe and the number of exciting startups compared to when we started Seek 20 years ago is chalk and cheese. There's a lot more accelerators and VCs and mentors and all of the really great elements that make up a tech ecosystem. But we've got a long way to go, and the single piece of advice I'd give to people is solve hard problems, don't solve easy problems. Anyone else can solve easy problems. Don't say, I'm going to start with focusing on Australia and then I'm going to kind of, focus on the US market, for example, because folks in the US aren't sitting there waiting and saying, oh, gee, I'm just going to wait till company XYZ comes here in 3 years' time and then I'm going to buy their product. It just doesn't work that way. It doesn't mean that you have to move to the US. It doesn't mean, but what I'm really saying is just be realistic, be ambitious. The great thing about being somewhere like New Zealand or Israel is you don't have a choice. You have to think global from day one. And we don't do enough of that. And that's, someone as an entrepreneur who very much thought local from day one. But, we had a really, really big domestic market, as does someone like Prosper who we've backed. For most businesses, in order to build a large scale business, you need to, 50 years ago, if you were starting a business, to have a really successful business, all you had to do was be better than anyone else in your suburb. And then maybe you had to be better than someone else in kind of all of Melbourne. Then you had to be the best in Australia to build a really, really successful business. It doesn't work like that anymore. I mean, most problems are being solved globally. Not every problem. Some problems are solved locally. A lot of the problems in Southeast Asia are solved on a regional basis. And we're very comfortable investing in businesses that are focused regionally. We won't invest in saying it's just focused on Singapore or Thailand, but we will invest in things that are just focused on the region. But by and large, most important, interesting problems are being solved globally. You have to think globally. Don't come up with a slide in your slide. The two things that will kind of drive me to distraction is a slide in a slide deck with like those Harvey balls or whatever that shows all your attributes, or like 10 out of 10, and all the other dickheads 0 out of 10. Google, hopeless. Facebook, shithouse. It's like, oh, don't do that. And the other thing that will really, really make me, Ben knows this, make me even more pissed off is like when entrepreneurs start talking like investment bankers and start talking about valuations and putting comps in their deck, and valuations is like, oh no, like please do not do that. I want, we want to back people who want to build great businesses who are not quasi investment bankers. We really, really want to back people who are just passionate, fantastic entrepreneurs.
I love it. I'm taking a few questions here. Oh, there's 19 upvotes here. We've got some serious upvotes here. How do you forecast Seek's future? We're jumping back a bit. Seek's future in employment.
I reckon thumbs down on that question. Very good. Very excited. I'm long out of the business, but I'm a very, very happy shareholder and cheering from the sidelines. It's very exciting.
Okay. This is a good one. How is AI changing employment in the future?
It's changing. It's changing everything. So I think I don't think there's much doubt that the most important thing over the next and there's going to a lot of important things happen I think in the world over the next 10, 20, 30 years. But I think AI dwarfs everything else. And I don't want to talk about medicine and stuff like that because I don't know a lot about life sciences, but in the world of software and technology, and even in medicine, obviously so many problems are now being solved by software. Most of the big problems in the world are being solved by software today. What's going to happen in AI, I think over the next 5, 10, 15 years is going to be incredibly exciting, incredibly scary. Lots and lots of jobs are going to disappear. Lots of new jobs are going to be created. It's sort of conventional wisdom that more jobs will disappear than will be created. That may or may not be true, but truthfully, it's much easier to identify the jobs that will disappear than the jobs that will be created. And so it's hard to be definitive on that point. It's easy to say, okay, autonomous vehicles are going to come along, so a couple of million truck drivers in the US are going to be out of a job, which unfortunately probably is going to be true over a 5 or 10 or a 15-year period. But it's much harder to identify the new jobs that'll come about and be created is point one. But what is troubling is that the jobs that will disappear will be fairly broadly based geographically. And so again, not to pick on truck drivers, but use that as an obvious example. There are kind of truck drivers everywhere. I mean, the stat that I saw recently that was, I've checked 3 or 4 times because I just didn't believe it. In 29 states of the US, truck driver is the single largest occupation. And so those jobs the jobs that disappear are going to disappear all over the world, and they're going to be semi-skilled jobs, they're going to be skilled jobs, but jobs involving a lot of the same activity over and over and over again. And but the jobs that are going to be created are going to be created in a fairly concentrated way. They'll be created mainly in those places where the innovation's occurring. And that's the fundamental reason why places like Australia, if we don't get it right, or those places that don't get right, building strong technology ecosystems, having great new companies emerge, having great existing companies successfully disrupt themselves. If that doesn't happen, you're absolutely screwed. And that's the single most important reason why it's really, really important for Australia to build a strong tech ecosystem. Then there's obviously a lens at an individual level, and broad and general and soft skills, leadership, discipline, empathy are so much more important than hard skills.
Do you start banging your head against the wall when people start talking about mining and stuff when you're trying to...
About mining?
Yeah.
No, not at all. We're obviously good at those things, and mainly good at it because we've got a lot of iron ore and coal in the ground. But no, there's nothing wrong with that. But I think that the point is that we need to ultimately people talked about, we're now talking going back pre-World War II, Australia riding on the sheep's back. And in the last 50 or 60 years, primarily our prosperity is a function of mineral wealth. And that's great, and it's, enormous luck, and the emergence of China sort of starting in the early 1990s was just, it's no coincidence the last recession we had in this country, basically in 1991, 92, which is when I started my career, coincided with the start of the emergence of China. But it's a lot better to be lucky than smart. And so there's nothing wrong with that good fortune. But the point is that if we assume that things will continue into the future as they've been in the past, then we'll be sadly disappointed. So we need to transition, and the economy needs to change. And I don't think it's really hard to get a sense of burning platform. I mean, and it's probably less so with a group like this, where I suspect I'm preaching to the converted, but across the country, the community as a whole. When you've had 26 years of consecutive economic growth, you've gone past Netherlands for the longest, in recorded history, the longest period of consecutive economic growth. It's very hard to convince people there's a burning platform, but I suspect there is.
Yeah, what's the next big thing you're focusing on, and is there a theme to the companies you're invested in? You're excited about AI. I'm going to try and. What else is getting excited?
Yeah, I think one of the things about AI and machine learning is it's not, it's not obvious as an investor how, best to kind of leverage what's occurring. I mean, maybe I'm saying this with hindsight, but kind of with the sort of the emergence of sort of the consumer internet, I think it was reasonably clear, it's a lot clearer with hindsight, but it was relatively clear there were kind of companies set up as consumer internet companies. We're not having companies set up today as AI companies, as machine learning companies. Machine learning is a critical component of what they do and the problem they solve. So it's sort of harder to kind of to do that. I mean, we are, as investors, we're probably less thematic than more thematic. It doesn't mean that we don't invest in certain themes, but it's pretty boring stuff. I mean, it's enterprise software, it's SaaS, a little bit of consumer and mobile internet. In Boston, Philippe and Yulia are very much focused on IoT, particularly wearable technology and digital health. And Philippe's got a really strong background there. So and a lot of marketplace businesses. Fiverr in Israel, Property Guru in Southeast Asia. We understand marketplace businesses well. We love the dynamics of them, the sort of the winner take all nature of them, or winner take most. So they're the sorts of businesses. But I mean, increasingly, I think in a lot of our portfolio companies. Just on the machine learning point, I was chatting to one of the guys at Seek the other week, and when I left 6 years ago, we had one, maybe 1.5 people in sort of data analytics, and she certainly wasn't a data scientist. She was a really good analyst, and the other person was a fairly junior analyst, and I think now they've kind of got 20 people. And so, which is not a large number, but sort of putting the scale of Seek not being a massive company, number of employees, that's just in Australia. There'd be a bunch of people in China and Brazil and places like that. So that's going to be really, really central to what every company does. It doesn't matter whether you're in retail, doesn't matter whether you're in healthcare, doesn't matter whether you're in hospitality. As an investor in terms of startups, that's a bit more complicated, but obviously we spend a lot of time thinking about how those opportunities are going to arise.
No.
Oh, the eSports one's interesting.
Yeah, there you go.
Because I've been learning a little bit. I'm not a gamer. Who here is a gamer? Not many. I know a few more. Someone's pointing to someone else. Is that a sort of an addiction or? I'm not a gamer, but actually, one of the other things I do is involved with the AFL, and one of the teams, the Adelaide Crows, has actually just bought an eSports team. And there's a number of sporting clubs around the world have bought eSports teams.
Sorry, explain that. I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, so basically they have bought a team that competes in an eSports league. I've forgotten what league it competes in. I think it's an Asia Pacific. Pardon? League of Legends, but I've forgotten what league they're in. I think they're in an Oceania League or an
Pro League. The team name is Legacy.
No, you're not. Are you a team member?
No, actually, I'm the MD of the eSports network. We actually.
So why am I answering this question?
Maybe he's the guy that put it up there.
You asked it. It's like a Dorothy Dixer. So I don't know. So I've been one of the guys, the AFL. Darren Birch has kind of just become really excited and really passionate. So I've spent a bit of time with him the last few months and reading a bit about it and learning about it. And it's someone who you know, my kids, you know, play some games and mainly, you know, sort of NBA and FIFA and stuff like that. And I've got 2 boys, my daughter doesn't play. And, but they're not like massive gamers, and I've never got into it. But I mean, it is just such an interesting and exciting world. You know, it's, you know, you kind of think, fairly or unfairly, you'd prefer your kids be running around a tennis court or a footy field than kind of exercising their finger all day. But it is a phenomenon. I mean, it's really exciting.
I'll see if this is a good one. Otherwise, it was apart from all right, look, I'm going to twist this a little bit. Talk about
Desperation sounds a bit needy.
Well,
I think I wouldn't go with desperate. I would say resilience.
Well, Tim Ferriss, I think it was the latest podcast, whatever. He asked a number of entrepreneurs, when should you quit?
Oh, yeah.
Right? And, you know, there's kind of this mentality of like, you know, winners never lose and winners never quit, you know, that kind of bullshit.
Yeah.
When it's not the case, some cases. So I like to just twist
Yeah, I'm older than just about probably 95% of the people in the room, but I mean, I don't know if anyone ever sort of fan of Monty Python, Holy Grail, and the famous scene. Does anyone remember that scene? It's just a flesh wound. I mean, look, it is a little bit like that with an entrepreneur, and the truth is, you know, normally, you know, I mean, truth is most entrepreneurs quit when they kind of, you know, they're sort of run out of options and no one's going to give them any more money, and, you know, they haven't got any customers. I mean, it's really, really hard. I mean, perhaps the more interesting question than when should you quit, because that's sort of hard, because usually when you're at that stage, it's kind of like, you know, it sort of doesn't really matter, because, you know, if you go on a few months too long and you can, you know, but, you know, at that point, it's probably going to be really, really hard to build a successful business. But, you know, at what point do you kind of pivot? At what point do you say, and you know, sometimes you see entrepreneurs at, you know, first sign of trouble, they have a tough week. It's like, okay, we need to change the business model. And other people, despite all the evidence indicating the business model needs tweaking, needs changes, like, no, we're going to get there. And so, you know, some people are super stubborn, some people aren't stubborn enough. The one piece of advice I'd give to people is kind of know yourself, and often talk about kind of fighting against your default. And so if your default is, and this is where self-awareness, I mean, this is probably another characteristic that's incredibly important in an entrepreneur. If your default is you're kind of a little bit stubborn and you try things and you pursue the same, you know, the old definition of insanity, trying the same thing over and over again, if that's more your style, to keep going despite evidence to the contrary, then kind of be aware of that and push back against your default. If on the other hand, your default is kind of wanting to have too many balls in the air and try too many things, and again, just be aware of that, and sort of, you know, when you're looking at a new opportunity, when you become excited about the latest opportunity, sort of say, okay, when was the last time I had a really, really important insight that I was super excited about? Yeah, it was before lunch. Okay, maybe that's too frequently for me to be constantly thinking about new ideas. So I think a lot of it is, you know, because for me to actually say, okay, this is a sign for when you've got to give up, or this is a sign when you're trying to do things, it's just, there's no answer to that. In every case, it's completely fact-based and depends on the individual situation. And even then, when you've got an agreed set of facts, you know, people's conclusion is going to be completely different, because me giving someone advice is, I'm just going to be imposing my own personality, my own judgment. So it doesn't make that, I mean, I can bring perspective, you know, which the entrepreneur may not be able to bring, but I also bring biases and defaults.
All right, I lied. One more question. We're going to end up on a positive, upbeat kind of note here. Please give me a good one. What does the future look like? What excites you the most? Let's go with this one here.
Well, I mean, I think, you know, one of the things people forget with venture businesses is we're a business, you know, we're kind of a young company, a startup ourselves, and I talked about raising money and, you know, building our team, and so it's on a sort of a different scale to someone who's trying to build a really, really significant operating business and stuff like that. And so for me, it's really exciting, again, to be involved in sort of starting a company again. I mean, there's never been basically, I mean, you know, if you look at some of the great funds in the US, you know, they're raising Fund 10, 11, Fund 15, Fund 18. In Australia, there's been a few Fund 2s. I'm not sure there's ever been a Fund 3. And so the challenge for us at SquarePeg and the challenge for the folks at, the Brandon Capitals and the Airtrees and the Blackbirds and all those other folks is to actually build a successful business ourselves. And basically, we're like coaches, not players. We're going to do that by backing outstanding entrepreneurs. But so for us, we're trying to build our own business at the same time as we're supporting other entrepreneurs. So for me, that's really exciting. I get much more excited by starting things and building things, and all the insecurity and ambiguity that comes with, when the shades of grey. We haven't proven ourselves. And it takes a long time in venture. Truth is, it probably takes you 7, 8, 9, 10 years in venture to actually say, you know what, we're really, really good at what we do. Problem is, by then, your investors have given you a lot of money. So I think we're on a really, really good track. But, for us to say, hand on our heart, we're really, really good at this, and we're really, again, this is a global, we have to be consistent with what we say to entrepreneurs. It's not about being the best in Australia, and that's not being disrespectful of the other funds in Australia. They would think exactly the same way. Unless we are really, really genuinely world-class on a global basis, we have no right to exist as a business. And so we're going through that whole journey, which I find really, really exciting.
Very cool. I want everyone back on their feet. And a big, big, big thank you for Paul for coming out.